Back in 1974, he was the star of TV. After that, Fonzie happened. After that, there was a brutal power battle that would change TV for good. Stories were taken from people, their honor was taken away, and a friendship was strained to the limit. Now, Henry Winkler tells the heartbreaking truth about why the show's first star quit and what everyone gave up for fame. His birthday is October 30th, 1945, and he was born in Manhattan, New York City. He was born to Ilsa and Harry Winkler, two German Jews who had just recently left Nazi Germany. They chose to live on Manhattan's Upper West Side. The family had enough money because Henry's dad did well in the timber business. But things were tough at home. Because of the hard times they had in Germany, his parents were strict and often mean. It hurt Henry a lot when they called him a dumb dog in German, and the name stuck with him for years. He had a hard time at school. Back then, no one knew what dyslexia was, but he had trouble reading and writing. People who knew him thought he was lazy or not trying hard enough. He felt angry and alone because of this. But something great happened when he was 13. He got excited after seeing the movie West Side Story. It made him want a new life, and he fell in love with acting. Another big event was his bar mitzvah when he was 13. He had a hard time reading Hebrew, but he learned everything by heart and did a great job. He was proud of himself for the first time. This made him feel a little better about himself, even though school was still hard. He felt better when he listened to Bob Dylan and the Beatles. He also learned how to take pictures, which helped him express himself and be artistic. Henry did something brave when he was 18 years old in 1963. It was his dream to be an actor, but his folks didn't want him to. It worked out for him to get into Emerson College in Boston. He started over when he left New York. Having trouble reading still made college hard for him, but he got through it. The theater teachers at school pushed him, and that was the first time he felt like he belonged. Henry chose to go even further after finishing in 1967. He tried to get into Yale School of Drama, which is one of the world's best performing schools. The application process was tough, but his skill and charm made them want to hire him. He was accepted, and later that year he began learning there. Yale was a bit tougher than before. It was fun to act, but because he had dyslexia, it was awful for him to learn lines and read hard plays. Henry had to think of creative ways to remember his words. His natural skills helped him get through it, even though he worked extra hard. He was in many big plays, including Peer Gynt and A Midsummer Night's Dream. At the end of his school years in 1970, he was ready to face the world. But things weren't easy after Yale. Henry went back to New York and had a hard time getting acting jobs, including ads. He took everything he could find. He was in 42 ads in 1 year, which helped him pay his bills and feel better about himself. He also did small roles in theater shows, such as one in 40 Carats on Broadway that made him famous. Henry got a small part in the 1973 movie The Lords of Flatbush. Even though the movie wasn't very expensive, it was his first time on a movie set. He had small parts on a few TV shows as well. These events gave him just the right amount of energy to get the attention of Hollywood casting agents. In the autumn of that year, Henry got a call about Happy Days, a new TV show. It took place in Milwaukee in the 1950s and was about a family. He tried out for a smaller part at first, but the makers asked him to try out for a part called Arthur the Fonz. Fonzarelli. It changed everything for Henry at that time. It wasn't meant to be a big deal that Henry Winkler played Fonzie when Happy Days began on January 15, 1974. The role of Arthur Fonzarelli was meant to be a tough guy from the neighborhood to balance out the show's nice main character, Richie Cunningham. Fonzie was in only 16 of the 24 shows in the first season, and most of the time he was only there for a few seconds. He was written as a high school dropout whose father had left him when he was 3 years old and his grandma raised him. He had a rough edge because of this, but he wasn't meant to be the star. You might not have first chosen Henry Winkler for the part. At first, the producers considered casting Mickey Dolenz from the Monkees, but when Winkler auditioned, he wowed everyone by making up a famous mirror scene on the spot. Winkler was 28 years old, unknown, and eager to prove himself at the time. Once he got the part, he started giving the character something extra that no one saw coming. At first, the show stuck to Fonzie's tough guy image, but there were small times that showed his softer side. Guess Who's Coming to Christmas was an episode where Fonzie spent the holidays with the Cunninghams because he was lonely. People liked how tough and vulnerable he was at the same time, and it changed how the show used his character. At first, not everyone at ABC liked Fonzie. The people in charge were afraid that his gritty image would make him look like a bad person. They even told him he couldn't wear a leather jacket unless he was near his bike. Fonzie wore a green wind cheater that didn't go with his style a lot because of this rule. They made sure Fonzie's motorbike was in as many scenes as possible, even if they didn't make sense, to get around the rule. ABC changed the rules because Fonzie became so popular over time. After the second season, the leather jacket was always a part of his style. When Fonzie became more well-known, he started running the show. People used his catchphrases all the time like and sit on it. People loved how he could fix anything with a tap, like pressing a button on a piano to make it play. Kids looked up to him, and adults thought he was cute. Fonzie was no longer a supporting figure by the second season. He became a star. Outside of the show, Fonzie was well-known. His face was on toys, lunchboxes, and signs all over the place. By 1976, Fonzie Goods was making a lot of money. Fonzie was well-known even in Japan. A poll from 1977 even said that he was more well-liked than the Emperor of Japan. In an effort to win over people, politicians even tried to link themselves to him. One of the best-known stars in America is Henry Winkler, who played Fonzie. But all this attention made things worse. On set, Fonzie became more and more important, which made Ron Howard, who played Richie, mad. Howard was the main person in the story. But as Fonzie's fame grew, Richie's part seemed less important. Howard later said it was annoying, but he never said Winkler was to blame. ABC wanted to change the name of the show to Fonzie's Happy Days at one point. Everyone was upset about this idea. He spoke out against the network, telling them it would be unfair to the rest of the group. Ron Howard said he would quit the show if the name was changed. Gary Marshall, the show's creator, stood up for the group and wouldn't let the network make the change. They finally came to an agreement by giving Winkler equal credit in the opening titles. The cast worked hard to keep the show fun and encouraging, even though there was a lot of stress. Even when Winkler won a Golden Globe for his part, he made the whole cast come up on stage with him to share the attention. It was a good idea to keep Happy Days as a group show. For 11 years, it was on TV and was one of the most loved comedies ever. After the end of Happy Days in 1984, things got hard for Henry Winkler. He played Fonzie for 11 years. Everyone loved this cool, cocky guy. People all over the world knew who the figure was because he was so well-known. Winkler had a lot of trouble with it. He didn't look like anyone else to the people who were casting him. Because I was the Fonz, he said, I couldn't get hired for 8 or 9 years. He didn't give up, though. He chose to do something different. His first movie, Memories of Me, came out in 1988. It wasn't a big hit, but it was a big step for him. He also began making music. He slowly built a new part of his work by taking charge of projects. He made another movie with Burt Reynolds in 1993 called Cop and a Half. He became more than just the Fonz with these projects. One move Winkler still feels bad about is declining the part of Danny Zuko in Grease. He was asked to be in the movie in 1977 when he was still playing Fonzie. The person, Danny, looked a lot like Fonzie. Winkler turned it down because he didn't want to play the same kind of part again. A cool guy from the 1950s wearing a leather jacket. In the end, John Travolta got the part, and Grease was a huge hit. After the fact, Winkler made a joke. I went home and had orange juice. He bought a plane at home. Winkler said Travolta was right for the part, even though he felt bad about choosing him. Winkler's work on the TV show MacGyver was a big turning point. It was a huge hit and ran for 7 seasons. The show was about a secret agent who could fix problems with everyday things. It also gave Winkler peace of mind about his money. Making films was a new way for him to get ahead in Hollywood, and it showed that he was more than just an actor. After many years, Winkler went back to performing and found a whole new group of fans. In 2003, he played Barry Zuckerkorn on the show Arrested Development. Barry was a bad lawyer who was also funny. People loved seeing him in a new light because it was so different from Fonzie. The famous Happy Days scene where the shark jumps was even made fun of in one joke on the show. People liked Winkler even more because he wasn't afraid to laugh at himself. Bryan Cranston's playing career reached a new peak in 2018 with the HBO show Barry. He played Gene Cousineau, an acting teacher who helps a hitman who wants to make things better in his life. The part was funny, sad, and had a lot of different levels. This was Winkler's first Emmy win, and he was 72 years old. This was his second Emmy nomination, this time for Happy Days, 42 years after his first one. It shows that you can always hit new heights. When Henry Winkler was 31, he learned he had dyslexia. This put a big wrench in his plans. The date was May 7th, 1977. He now knew why school had been so hard all along. He found out the truth when he and his wife, Stacy, took Jed, her son, to see an expert. Jed was having trouble in school, and the doctor talked about signs that Winkler knew all too well. He realized for the first time that he wasn't lazy or stupid because he had trouble reading and writing. His mind just wasn't working the same way. This finding made Winkler feel a lot of different things. He was happy because he knew what was wrong the whole time, but he was also mad. He remembered years of being called names and not getting what people meant. He said, "I was both happy and angry. It felt better when I knew what it was called. And anger because I felt like I'd been treated badly." He had a hard time in school. He was in the bottom 3% of his class at New York City's McBurney School, where he got terrible grades and had a GPA of 2.2. People thought he wasn't trying, but the truth was that no one knew how to help him learn. After being told he had dyslexia, Winkler started talking about it and pushed for early testing. He thought that school would have been very different for him if he had been identified when he was younger. He went so far as to say that he could have saved himself a lot of time and trouble. Winkler didn't let it stop him. Instead, he found ways to change. He came up with clever ways to remember lines by reading them out loud and listening to them again. He was able to succeed with this method, even though it was hard for him to read lines. A lot of people have dyslexia, and Winkler's story shows how important it is to get the word out. Studies show that about 20% of people may have dyslexia, but a lot of them are never told they have it. Winkler began telling his story to students and going to schools to encourage them not to give up. He had talked to more than 250,000 students by 2025 about how to deal with problems and find their own skills. His marriage to Stacy Weitzman is also a big part of his life. They met on August 23rd, 1976, at Stacy's job in a clothes store in Los Angeles. Winkler came in to buy a sport coat, but left with Stacy's phone number. He said he knew she was the one right away. After 2 weeks, they went to the movies for their first date, and the bond between them got stronger. Winkler was happy to become Jed's stepfather because Stacy had a young son from her first marriage. On May 5th, 1978, they got married in a small wedding with only 30 people present. They had 2 more kids, which made their family bigger. Max was born on August 18th, 1983, and Zoe was born on September 30th, 1980. It wasn't always easy for Winkler and Stacy to raise a mixed family, but they worked together. They went through hard times together, like when Jed was diagnosed with dyslexia, which made Winkler realize he also had a learning problem. They didn't let it get to them. Instead, they became strong supporters of helping kids with dyslexia. The Winklers made their home cozy and caring. Friends and family could always come over to their house. It turned into a spot where many young stars in Hollywood would hang out. That's why they made rules like no work on the weekends so they could spend more time with their family. They started having Sunday dinners, which is something that is still done today, even with their grandkids. They've been married for over 47 years, which is very long in Hollywood. They've been through hard times together, like when Stacy was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2001, but their bond has only grown stronger. For their 45th wedding anniversary in 2023, they said their vows again in a small service at home. Many people look up to their love and dedication. Winkler had trouble reading and writing because he has dyslexia. This led to a surprising new job as a children's book author. His agent told him to write a book about what he had done. "We thought it was impossible at first. It was a joke. I'm dyslexic. How do I write a book?" He knew, though, that his story could help other kids like him. He hired the experienced author Lynn Oliver to help him make up the character Hank Zipser, who is based on Winkler's own life. Falls or Does It was the first book. It came out on May 14th, 2003. The first year it came out, it sold over 150,000 books, which is a lot. The series grew to 17 books about a boy named Hank who has trouble reading. The books are all about his everyday life and school activities. Oliver wrote down the stories that Winkler told her. She made sure they were funny, familiar, and simple enough for kids to understand. Schools all over the world have used the Hank Zipser stories to help kids learn about dyslexia. Also in 2014, Winkler began a new series for younger fans called Here's Hank. A special style is used in these books to help kids who have trouble learning read better. Winkler went to schools to talk about his books and life, which made kids want to believe in themselves. He began writing Being Henry, The Fonz, and Beyond, his autobiography, on October 15, 2022, when he was 77 years old. He wrote his story with help from James Kaplan. Dyslexia made it hard for Winkler to write the book. He was diagnosed with it when he was 31 years old. He had a hard time writing things down, so he told Kaplan about his thoughts for hours. They worked hard for 8 months, sometimes late at night. In 256 pages, Winkler wrote about painful memories from his childhood and the hard times of his work. He had to face things he hadn't thought about in years during the long process. Winkler was surprised to find out how much he had forgotten about the good old days. There was a time in the 3rd season when the makers thought about changing the name of the show to Fonzie's Happy Days. Winkler had always thought of himself as a team player, so this news shocked him. He also talked about how tough the show was. He worked up to 25 scenes some days and for 15 hours. He didn't have much time for his family because of this. Winkler said that because of work, he missed many important events in his kids' lives. The book also told what went on behind the scenes of Happy Days. Winkler didn't get along well with Anson Williams, who played Potsy. Williams said that Winkler stole a funny moment during a live taping in 1978. They didn't talk to each other outside of work for almost 20 years. They finally made up at a group reunion in 1999. It was also hard for Winkler to get along with Tom Bosley, who played Howard Cunningham. In 1977, Bosley said that Winkler was making the rest of the cast look bad because Fonzie was so famous. Their relationship got worse from there for the rest of the show. Winkler also talked about how Erin Moran, who played Joni, had a hard time with drug abuse. He remembered a day in 1982 when she showed up to set while drunk, which caused delays. When Scott Baio came on as Chachi, Winkler felt scared because he thought Baio would take the show away from him. This made the two of them compete with each other. He also remembered a time when he was with Donnie Most, who played Ralph Maff in 1980. Most said that his character wasn't getting enough attention, which made him feel left out. After that, Winkler worked hard to get him better stories. The people who came on the show as guests told their own stories. On October 19, 1977, Robin Williams tried out for the part of Mork. Winkler thought back to how Williams's made-up alien language shocked everyone in the room. Winkler saw right away that Williams was unique and told director Gary Marshall to cast him. During a personal time, when Williams thought his job might not last, Winkler reassured him. Williams and Winkler became close friends. Winkler also said that he met Harrison Ford when he was scared, and that Ford was fresh out of acting school. After he became famous, Ford wrote Winkler a note to thank her. Ron Howard's time on Happy Days showed that there were hard times that came with being successful. On January 15, 1974, when the show first aired, he played the lead role of Richie Cunningham. But as the show got more famous, Henry Winkler's character Fonzie became a cultural icon. Howard's whole life changed after this. By the middle of the 1970s, Fonzie was more well-known than Howard's character, and he began to feel like the network leaders didn't respect him. In an interview on The Graham Norton Show in 2021, he talked about this. He said that Richie was the original star, but Fonzie became the main character. Promotions and events were all about Fonzie, and Howard noticed that studio and network heads were being rude to him in business and in person. What this treatment did to people was clear in the show. After the 1976 to 1977 season, Richie's part was being cut down to make room for stories about Fonzie. One example is the February 1st, 1977 show called Fonzie's Old Lady. Richie had a small part in the story, which was mostly about Fonzie. In 1978, things got worse when ABC bosses wanted to change the name of the show to Fonzie's Happy Days. In July, this idea came up at a network meeting. Howard, who was only 24, was very upset about it. He thought about leaving the show at one point. But Henry Winkler was very against changing the name, and the plan was shelved. Things didn't get better because of the media. People who write about news stories often asked Howard how it felt to be treated like an extra on his own show. These constant warnings made him even more angry. Howard stayed professional and kept putting on great shows despite this. For example, his acting in the 1978 show was praised for how deeply it touched people. He felt underappreciated, though, which made him think about leaving. Finally, he chose to leave Happy Days as a permanent cast member at the end of the 1979 to 1980 season. Passage Part 2, his last show, aired on May 6, 1980. This choice was a turning point for Howard. It was hard for him to leave the show, but it gave him the chance to follow his dream of becoming a director. After starting to direct with Grand Theft Auto in 1977, he could now put all of his attention on starting a new job. Many people, including Henry Winkler, were shocked when Howard left. Since they had worked together for a while, they became close, and Winkler found it hard to think about Howard going. Howard called Winkler the day before his last show aired to tell her the news. Later, Winkler said in an interview that he was shocked but knew why Howard did what he did. Their friendship went beyond the good times. In 1982, when Howard directed Night Shift, Winkler went to the set to show his support. It wasn't a surprise to anyone who had worked with Howard over the years that Winkler often praised him in comments. At the 2024 Emmy Awards, Henry Winkler and Ron Howard shared a special moment. It had been 50 years since the first episode of their show, Happy Days. The event took place in Los Angeles, and the famous set from Arnold's Drive-In was brought back to life. It looked like it did back then. There were sports flags, a jukebox, and even red seats. The crowd went crazy when Winkler, who is 78 years old now, and Howard, who is 70 years old, walked on stage. It was like seeing long-lost friends get back together. Howard said, "This is great." He responded, "Feels like home." There was also a funny part. When they got on stage, the Happy Days theme song wasn't playing. Howard made a joke about where other shows got their theme songs. Winkler stayed in character as Fonzie and claimed to play the jukebox. When he did, the song began and everyone in the room stood up and cheered. It had just the right amount of humor and memories. The night was about more than just remembering. Winkler talked about how well Howard has been doing lately. Howard got an Emmy for the CNN documentary he made about Jim Henson, who made Sesame Street. That week, the documentary had already won a number of other awards. He told Howard he was proud of him and said he'd been his best friend for 50 years. A lot of work went into making this gathering really special. Winkler and Howard practiced their lines and timing a lot. The clothes were great for their roles as Fonzie and Richie. The crew even found a motorbike that looked a lot like the one Fonzie used to ride. It was clear that they wanted everything to be fine. It worked out well. The meeting made a big difference. People who liked it wrote about it all over social media, and Happy Days became popular all over the world. A lot of people watched the old shows again, and streaming services saw a huge rise in viewers. There were even rumors that the show might be brought back, with Winkler and Howard producing. There was more to their relationship than just working together. The way Winkler and Howard felt about each other was like thunderbolt energy. They got along right away when they met on the set of Happy Days in 1974. Winkler was 27 years old and Howard was only 18, but they became fast friends. He told a story about how they could practice and film a 3-page scene in 20 minutes. It wasn't just skill. They seemed to fully understand each other. During the third season, one story stood out. Richie and Fonzie had to talk about something personal. The scene was perfect in one take. The director liked it so much that he said there would be no second take. Not even perfection can be made better. These kinds of times showed how strong their bond was. After the show was over, their bond stayed strong. It was hard for Winkler to find new parts, and Howard helped him out. Howard asked him to come to the set of his 1985 movie Cocoon. Winkler grew more interested in acting after that visit, which made him remember why he loved it. He also became Howard's grandfather for his daughter Bryce Dallas Howard. He was there for all of her big events, like her first school play and her big break in the Village. Bryce said Winkler was like a parent to her because she always helped her and supported her. Ron Howard walked Winkler down the aisle with her when she got married. This showed how much he meant to their family. A lot of people in Hollywood were inspired by their bond. In fact, their relationship was used as an example by a university to start a course on how to make creative teams last. He said it best when he said, "What Ron and I have is rare. It's not enough to just be friends or co-stars. I'm thankful for this link every day because it doesn't depend on time.